I need to talk about a renewed U.S. threat towards Greenland, and that threat being clarified. Because I was watching Stephen Miller. I know. Don't worry too much for me. I was watching Stephen Miller on one of the morning programs. I believe he was being interviewed by I think it was ABC. Stephanopoulos, I believe. I forget who he's with. But I was watching the interview, and he comes out there and asks Stephen Miller straight up, like, are we leaving military options, military actions, military strikes on the table in reference to Greenland? And Stephen Miller comes out and he says, "Oh, you're trying to get a soundbite out of me. You're trying to get a headline. You're not going to do that. You're good at your job, Stephanopoulos. You're good at your job, Stephanopoulos, but you're trying to fish a headline out of my mouth. And, I'm not going to do that. The president has made clear that it is obviously, use the word obviously, the case that Greenland should be part of the United States. As if everybody has been walking around in the United States in some type of we're like Nicolas Maduro talking about Guyana. We have, it must be reclaimed for America. How do you, poor Americans, every day continue to live and breathe without Greenland being part of the United States? Now, it is the case that there is a historic tie to America wanting Greenland. That you can go back to right after the Civil War, and the United States had interest in ownership of the land. That we saw it as largely desolate with few people on it, even though there are locals there. Majority of locals who are not pulled to be that want to be part of the United States, by the way. But we wanted it due to its access to the Arctic. And if what they say about climate change is to be believed, these potential launching points for naval bases and military bases will only increase in value as time goes on, not to mention its strategic location in between the transatlantic relationship, which puts Greenland in a strategically significant position that has been utilized by the United States before. During World War II, Greenland was a major base of operations logistically for the United States, trying to move military goods back and forth across the transatlantic. And you could actually find the remains of American operations in different parts of the island because it is a gigantic piece of territory. I think some people don't realize how large Greenland is, but if Greenland was to join the United States, it would be the size of many, many states joining the Union. I mean, it would cover up much of the northeastern United States if it was to be placed over America on a map. So it's not like we're just adding a few blocks of territory here. It's a massive piece of territory. And so some equipment was less expensive to transport back, so it ended up being left there. It almost looks kind of like a equipment graveyard in some areas. Either way, point is there is a physical evidence to the fact that we have seen Greenland as an important logistical node for the armed forces, and as time goes on, it will only increase in value in its relation to its potential to help us gain access to the Arctic. So there is a historical basis for an interest in Greenland. But you want to know what's interesting is after the 1870s, and as we developed, Pax Americana, this post-World War II era, we came to the realization, oh, wait, we are the ones without smashed industry. We're the ones with the factories. We're the economic behemoth. We're quite a significant military power. And these nation states have no quarrel with us. Denmark has no quarrel with us. Greenland has no quarrel with us. Or any other of the territories of the Kingdom of Denmark. And much of Europe has no quarrel with us. So if we want something, we can usually just negotiate it. Whether it was participation in our wars in Afghanistan, as Article 5 was called, the only time Article 5 has been called for the entirety of the alliance, and we brought them with us to Afghanistan after 9/11. They came with us. Much of them came with us into Iraq during the Iraq War, if you want to exclude France. And they have been of great assistance in intelligence gathering and military development. Our R&D programs are closely integrated. So we came to the conclusion that it made more sense to just talk with these people, work with these people, as we had similar interests, and it helped both of us to cooperate. So the thing that's interesting about this Danish excursion is I really do think that Trump might be a little hoi brained. I don't know if this is Zoomer speak. Let me explain it for people who might not understand. I think Trump, despite the fact that every objective that is being talked about, whether it is more naval access, more military bases, more economic cooperation, whether it be resource development, all of this is easily entertained through direct negotiation and diplomacy. While there might be concerns about environmental damage to locals, and they might have questions about resource extraction, and there might be specifics which you would expect any local population to care about. If somebody was to try to make a coal mine in my backyard as a local here, I would care greatly about that. Not that it would be coal mining in Greenland, of course. Uh, all of this could be achieved through negotiation. Yet he stays on the idea that Greenland should be part of the United States. We have Stephen Miller's wife tweeting out images of Greenland draped in the American flag. And so I have to think, to a certain extent, is this motivated purely by the grandeur of territorial expansion? Is there something that Donald Trump saw in the land that was being taken in Ukraine, or in land captures by other states? Is there something that he saw that he just sees as grand? Is it that he went through the history books, and the same way that he got attached to tariffs by listening to the presidents of old and their policies on tariffs, many of these he took inspiration from would end up abandoning tariffs later. Is this him going through American history and seeing the Louisiana Purchase, seeing America's expansion, seeing those pictures of America's light going westward, and he took the conclusion we need some more of that? Because when you talk about the practical implementation of America's security objectives, access to bases, everything, it could be achieved through diplomacy. And so you have to ask, what else is it? Is it really that he just wants to be the sole proprietor? He wants to be the one to control who gets the contracts when it comes to resource development? I mean, the security cooperation would surely be attended to. And here is President Trump clarifying what Stephen Miller said was the press trying to get a soundbite. This is from the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt. President Trump has made it well known that acquiring Greenland is a national security priority of the United States, and it's vital to deter our adversaries in the Arctic region. The president and his team are discussing a range of options to pursue this important foreign policy goal. And of course, utilizing the U.S. military is always an option at the commander-in-chief's disposal. An explicit statement saying they want to keep military force, military action on the table. No deployment of American troops, deployment of American bombs. Mind you, Greenland is a population that is like, we're talking about, like 30,000 people. We're not talking about a lot of people here. So I am not going to stand here and say that, it would be a particularly long war. I don't even want to war game it out. But the disastrous economic and diplomatic consequences for the transatlantic relationship, when it comes to our relationship not only with Denmark, but NATO as a whole, as Greenland is NATO territory. It is territory of a fellow NATO state that have locals on it. It's not uninhabited, that have their own wishes and desires. And while they're talking about the future of Greenland, whether Greenland's going to continue to be part of a Kingdom of Denmark through referendum, or they're going to go off and become their own state, the United States is entering itself into the conversation and saying, we want that territory because of our national security interests, which the Russians said the same thing about Ukrainian territory. The Chinese constantly say the same thing about Taiwan, as well as, of course, revanchism, the reclaiming of what is Chinese clay. But national security concerns was often cited as well. I mean, I'm sure Saddam Hussein said something similar before going into Kuwait. I'm sure there are national security concerns, but if all of those concerns could be amended to without the use of military force, without the need to threaten military force, and certainly without the need to use it or to forcefully annex them, then why is it being achieved? Why is it being aimed at? And this is going to get more and more embarrassing as we have more press conferences between American diplomats and European diplomats or European heads of state. This is a British reporter who apparently had not had the muzzle put on them before entering the room. And they asked straight up to Kushner and Witkoff, who was at the Paris summit, the summit in Paris recently. We're going to watch this press conference Q&A section in full in a moment. But I wanted to show this section because it is directly referencing the deal with Greenland, the United States trying to pressure Greenland with the threat of military force. And he essentially asks, how can we believe the United States is going to come up to, stand up for values on, the defense of Ukraine and sovereign territory when the United States is currently threatening the sovereign territory of another NATO member? And you could feel a pin drop in the room. You could see everybody was very uncomfortable with the question as European diplomats are trying to walk the tightrope as they recognize that American cooperation with any deterrence program in the aftermath of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, or with continued munition provisions, or with just continued trade, as many of them are facing economic problems at home, puts them in a perilous position. One that has been readily exploited by U.S. diplomats, but makes them all notably uncomfortable when they're asked about this, because you can tell Keir Starmer doesn't want to answer.
And the whole amazing team in the U.S. Obviously, you saw last week the incredible capability of the U.S. military, and that's just a small piece of what they're capable of doing. And so they've been really thinking about this, and they believe that a real peace here is possible, and there are ways to stand behind it.
James Mates, ITV News from London. Mr. Starmer, Prime Minister, today's commitments by the United States are already being called a game changer, and I know there's a reluctance to talk about Greenland today, but what value do these commitments have on the very day that at the highest levels of government in Washington they are talking about seizing the sovereign territory of a fellow NATO member? Mr. Witkoff or Mr. Kushner, if I may ask you, the commitments made today, does President Trump commit to coming to the aid of any European forces deployed in Ukraine were they to come into conflict with Russian forces? Will President Trump have their back? And President Zelensky, if I may ask you, is this enough? You said before today you were 90% of the way towards a peace agreement. How close are you now?
Well, let me start. On the question of Greenland, I've been very clear as to what my position and the position of the UK government is, both in statements I made myself yesterday and in the statement that was put out earlier today. I've been equally clear that the relationship between the UK and the US is one of our closest relationships, particularly on issues on defence, security and intelligence. And we work with the US 24/7 on those issues.
Just to make myself absolutely clear on Greenland, read my previous statement. Here's a link. Very clear. Thank you. Gave me homework. See, this is the problem. They know, both in Washington and in many of these European capitals, that Europe has integrated itself so much defense-wise with the United States that issues like this and the potentiality of Europe having to come to blows with the United States diplomatically, militarily, over territory is so unfathomable and would undermine their defense, their weapon systems cooperation, R&D, a lot of defense planning, that they would like to rather quietly basically bat this away. Hope that with time and internal pressure and many of the forces that would press against Trump taking action to annex Greenland by force will take effect before they have to come out and make a show. Like Keir Starmer thinks like, hey, he wants a trade deal with the United States, and he wants the United States to support Ukraine. So does Merz, so does Macron, obviously, so does Zelensky. And so it makes more sense, I think, in their mind, take a back step and just release quiet statements and press reports saying, obviously, Greenland is part of Denmark. Obviously, it is Danish territory that is protected by NATO. Our relationship with Denmark is steadfast and we stand with them. Also, our relationship with the United States is steadfast and we stand with them. And so they want to keep the status quo while not basically threatening the United States if they threaten the status quo, which they are currently doing. While the only person really releasing strong, stringent, tough statements on this is unsurprisingly the Danish prime minister, who continues to say that all of the territories of the Kingdom of Denmark will not be put up for sale, will not be taken by force, and that they're protected by Article 5 NATO treaties. So right now, it seems that the Europeans are largely playing a balancing game, hoping that any of the pressures that could undermine Trump's efforts to take Greenland, internal opposition in the United States to the ridiculousness of this type of forceful expansion when the locals do not want it, the locals themselves not wanting it, and the image that produces of the United States, the disregard for international law. I think that barrier is kind of already knocked. It's little, no, it's that one's a little gone. The potentiality of a real split in the transatlantic relationship as one NATO member threatens another NATO member, and the potentiality for the death of NATO, which would almost certainly occur in a situation where the United States used force to take territory from another NATO member. And of course, the threat to US-EU trade, which, while Europe is heavily dependent on it, the United States makes a lot of money off of it as well. And Trump already has enough problems with the economy as is. Not to mention, we're a year away from the midterms. One might say that while Donald Trump has control of Congress, this is the best time to act. Congress could intervene with the War Powers Act if Trump really was trying to threaten military action to take over Greenland, which would have give European diplomats, U.S. politicians, others they could engage with to try to stop type of congressional action that way. Before then, Congress has shown itself to be basically a limp institution when it comes to enforcing the law on the president of the United States, whether it has to come with classification authority and whether or not they're informed before major military actions like the raid in Venezuela. Whether it is them or the Gang of Eight, which has a documented history of not leaking, or it has to do with, actually, you can go to first term Trump too when it comes to the Soleimani strike, or you could go to the power of the purse and how that has been fundamentally challenged from Congress. So one might say that in the lead up to a midterm year, another follow-up after Venezuela of military force or threats of military force against the territory like Greenland might be electoral poison. But on the other hand, especially no new wars president, but on the other hand, that might be electoral poison, but this might be the only time he could seriously pursue it if they lose Congress. And then that threat cannot really be taken seriously, since a Democratic-controlled Congress is going to use the War Powers Act if we invade Greenland. In Venezuela's case, Democrats don't control the House, and Nicolas Maduro is hated on a bipartisan basis. There might not be agreement about what was to have been done about Nicolas Maduro, but in Greenland's case, there's not even really a huge desire amongst the Republican Party for some territorial expansion into Greenland. This seems to be the personal pet project of the President of the United States, certain advisors around him, and has been taken up only by his most diehard supporters in both the House and the Senate. And even some of his longtime supporters don't really talk about it as like a, hey, everybody, let's take over Greenland. I mean, the issues that they're worried about right now is increases to health insurance, unaffordability, the cost of food, rent prices. I mean, there's a bunch of other issues that are of import. I mean, the end of the Obamacare subsidies and what that'll mean for the millions of Americans that not only directly rely on it, but those who rely on the medical institutions that are funded through those subsidies. I mean, why do you think a lot of these rural hospitals are shutting down if people don't have the money to keep them open in order to fund operations? I mean, they shut down and they redirect people to the furthest hospital, the closest hospital available, which just so happened to be an hour and a half to 2 hours away. Either way, I think Donald Trump right now, I got a little off on a tangent there. I'm sorry, I care about people's healthcare just a little tiny bit, that people, get open heart surgery if they need it. Either way, though, I think that time, this gap in the next year, is probably the avenue where I'm most nervous about American action on Greenland. So it makes sense that the reporters are bringing it up now. It makes sense that they're talking about it now. And Donald Trump did say just a few days ago, talk to me in 2 weeks, as if in 2 weeks he'll wrap up Greenland and continue to ignore maybe even any real significant progress on Ukraine when it comes to the actions taken on the ground to build the foundation for peace, instead of just talking about peace and negotiating on negotiations and negotiating the negotiation of a negotiation. Instead, maybe his next pet project will be Greenland. So I'm still worried about the next year. And there's no answer from Europe on this. They'd rather just wish the question would go away. And so for the near future, I just expect the Danish prime minister to be the one that's loudest. And I fear that lack of noise from Europe, Trump will see their want for the issue to go away, their desire that it not interfere with their relations, as a weakness on the principle of the matter, that they would literally just ignore it if he was to take an action like that. And that could risk perpetuating this nonsense and egging Trump on. But on the other hand, from their perspective, if you were to be snappy with the president of the United States, considering how little it takes to make him flip-flop, how a lie in the middle of the night can get him angry about a fake assassination attempt on Putin, or an encirclement and curse that never occurred, or just, what mood he could really be in, how he just depends, how he feels to react to a red line being crossed. So there's a balancing act. At least that's how they feel. But the sooner a stronger message is sent, maybe the sooner this can all be over. Otherwise, we'll just have to wait and hope it just goes away. And anything with Trump, just hoping that he goes away and forgets about it. You know what this sounds like? This sounds like first-term Trump, where people ignored the stuff in his administration. He said, oh, sure, yeah, Trump, we'll look into that. That's a great idea. And just hope he doesn't bring it up again. But eventually, he would end up bringing it up again. And when they do, probably just be silence again until he pushes it forward. How will he push it forward? Would it be a tariff? Tariff might be the first option. Then he escalates from there. It's weird to think about. It's weird to game out. How does the escalation situation start for territorial concessions?